Right. So I was talking to a friend earlier today about what things we've noticed as far as conversations around AI in the tech industry. We both work as software engineers. She's more on the managerial end of things than I am. But we began both software engineers, both work in the same company, and have noticed a lot of interesting trends both in our company but also in the industry at large. And one thing that I said when we were talking, and I've realized is even more true as I've thought about it since, is that AI is kind of ruined my perception of tech as an industry. Both the industry and, frankly, even my job and role in society at large. Where when I started working, when I was going to school to become a software engineer, I had an idea in my mind of what that meant. And that idea was very much in line with what I think is the kind of typical understanding of tech. This idea that the tech industry is filled with a bunch of innovators and geniuses and people who are really trying to make the world a better place. And that's why all this money is generated and keeps being thrown back into it through VCs and government contracts, whatever. That all of this makes sense because the goal is to improve people's lives. And as long as you hold to that North Star, then the companies they explain themselves. That was my understanding for quite a while. It has slowly been diminishing as I've been in the workforce, as I've gotten to see from the inside what sorts of things make a company tick. And it's been, I think the AI bubble was that kind of last nail in the coffin. Or that was the final straw. That was the moment that made it clear to me that this is all just essentially a money making scheme. Where maybe it's true that in the good old days back in the original Silicon Valley, that these companies were actually making computers and not essentially just behaving as banks. They were doing a public service. They were creating things that hadn't been seen before with incredible amounts of power and potential. That I would like to still believe is true, but with every passing day, seeing how AI is talked about, the sort of promises that are made as far as what it can do or will do, leads me to believe that at least at this point, and frankly probably for the last 5 to 10 years at least, tech mostly just exists as a way of funneling money, where the priority is shifted away from creating truly innovative products that will improve people's lives to creating something that people will buy or people will pay for. And that's morally where you feel about that, whatever. But it is not really what I had signed up for. I fell fully into the idea that by going and getting this engineering degree, I was working to get to a spot where I could make things that had meaningful impact. And part of how that works, given at least the structure of this country, is you need to go to one of the big players. And that by going to one of the big industry titans, you'll have access to the resources and the freedom to do your best work. And I think it is increasingly obvious and will admit, I think has been obvious to other people for longer than it's been obvious to me, that that's not really what tech is. That, and for other people, that was more made apparent in just looking at for instance, the smartphone life cycle, and how products were essentially now being made universally to break, or at least weren't quite as durable as they were before, or weren't as easy to repair. There's many different avenues that I think you can make a compelling case for the technology industry not really putting people first. And all of those were there. I'd seen all of them. I'd heard a lot of those arguments in the past before, but they never really resonated with me in the way that the AI argument has, where I would tell you that, sure, it's true that nobody really makes phones anymore that you can replace. You can't take the back off and swap a battery or anything. You can't buy a laptop and really do your own upgrades to it anymore. But hey, that's actually because people voted with their dollar, and it's just so much more convenient to not have to worry about those things. And I say this as someone with a gaming PC that's built their own PC and been using that for over a decade now. I am glad I have that flexibility, but also I don't know that I'd really care to do that with my phone or my set-top box. It's not even what they're called anymore. But like the streaming device for my TV, whatever. Like, it's cool that I have the option, but I don't always want to do that. And that was where I was able to basically land and not think too critically. And I in some ways am ashamed to admit it, but also I think it helps to really get an idea of where I'm at now, is that I went so long without seeing this, and working through this AI bubble has made that impossible to deny. I think in part it helps that this is the first bubble I've really experienced where I was alive technically for the .com bubble, but I wasn't really aware of what was going on. And so most of my experience with it was reading about it after the fact and hearing people describe the fact that it was that there were companies with basically no connection to the internet whatsoever, but they were smart enough to throw in some kind of web in the name or give some idea that there might be internet-based whatever, and that increased their value. Just that alone. Didn't matter that the actual product essentially didn't utilize it at all. Point is, that was enough to drive hype. And that feels one-to-one with what I'm seeing in AI now. In companies and their ridiculous evaluations, and also in the products that are being announced that use and promise AI features. Where the thing that one thing that stood out to me and was one of the sort of clear red flag moments where I'm like, how is no one else seeing this shit? Or why are they allowed to even release this as a product? Was the OpenAI Pin and the other one, the Rabbit R1, where these devices were seemingly just ways to provide a camera to a generative model, which in some sense you could argue is useful. Realistically, this is just what a phone is. Like, why you would need an individual product for this, I don't know. But that's what they were selling. And as part of their building a compelling use case, they told a story of, you can use this device to get an idea for how many calories are in your food. And so if you say hold a handful of almonds, or maybe you can have some tomato soup, just take a picture of it and ask the AI, how many calories are in this, or will this work with my dietary restrictions? And of course, in these demos, the AI always seemed to come up with the right answer. But in practice, of course, I say of course because, again, to me, it seemed immediately apparent that this couldn't work this way. But, I look at this and say, even just thinking me as a human, if someone gave me a photo of tomato soup, could I reasonably even get a ballpark estimate for the number of calories in there? Do I know all of what went into that soup? Could I guess any of the seasonings or amount of heavy cream or anything in there? No. Could I maybe get it right once or twice? Sure. But would I feel comfortable saying this is a thing I could do reliably to the point of selling it as a service to other people? Absolutely not. And with an understanding of how generative models function or work, it's even more ridiculous to me that gets sold as a product. Where generative models, I would assume, if you're even watching this video, right, you have an idea. But if for some reason you don't, to break the bad news to you, I guess, all of these things are just fancy predictive text. It is functionally, more advanced, but essentially the same as that top row of, next words in the keyboard on your phone, where they essentially train that model so well with so much data that it can effectively predict what the next word should be given whatever your request is. But the most important part of this, understanding this, is that it is based off of existing text. It can only give you answers and responses based off of the text it has access to. And so that means the data that it was trained on, which is where you hear about all these companies essentially scraping the entirety of the internet to train their models, or the whatever data in the question you ask it. And that's why there's this whole field around prompt engineering, where effectively it's just a matter of how well can you format a question or your desires for the model. How well can you format that such that the model can then incorporate those things in providing a better answer to you? And what that means together is that you'll be able to use these models for incredible text related tasks. Like if you give it, for instance, this is something I've used it for recently. I was able to provide it with a spreadsheet with like 10 to 20 different columns, hundreds of rows, all of this data that was used to basically structure and organize, without saying too much, we'll say the desired responses and I need to be vague because this was kind of work related, but basically I was able to take a large spreadsheet, CSV of data, and get that formulated into just individual strings, a couple sentences. And this saved me what would have been hours of work otherwise. It would have taken me a long time to go through all the different rows and columns in this spreadsheet and try to organize it into a way that is coherent. But because I had that spreadsheet with all the words in it already, I was instead able to ask a generative model to structure this in a way that I desired. And because that spreadsheet existed and I gave it to the model, it was able, it used that as information, which is perfect. This is like one of those closed loop things that is an incredible use case for AI. AI, I put in quotes, really generative models, LLMs, whatever. But what's not a particularly good use case is, for instance, detecting food and the calories of it in photos. Because if I think about this, again, as a human being, there are so many easy ways to just take a photo incorrectly or like in a way that just doesn't show the full context of what's, just the volume of the bowl of soup, for example. And like these are things that are vital and truly make or break for your ability to guesstimate this. And so if you're going to sell a product with the promise that it's able to detect something in food, the model will give you an answer, which I suppose is not nothing, but it's not doing this by asking or thinking about the weight of the food or the dimensions of the bowl. It essentially just sees, oh hey, this is a photo of tomato soup in a bowl. What exists online? What in my existing data set do I have about tomato soup in bowls? Okay, well, a lot of what I'm seeing about bowls of tomato soup says that they are, basically this many calories. And so the LLM will tell you that your bowl of soup is this many calories. Does that mean that your actual bowl of soup is that many calories? No. For all you know, it could be it does not know the minutia. But I think because it returns a response that at least is plausible in some instances, that's enough to maybe trick people. But if the promising this and offering it as a utility, like, this is something that to me, and I know other people in and around the tech space who aren't using AI to effectively try to scam and make a few quick bucks, like, this is something that you wouldn't feel comfortable selling because you can't guarantee how it will operate. And that, at least as I had previously understood it, was something that the tech industry was against, was that they were trying to make products that will for sure make something easier for you. Where, even from calculators to word processors to, your small phone, internet browser, whatever. All of these things are solving genuine problems in a way that is consistent and repeatable. Whereas AI is largely unproven, inconsistent, but I guess flashy enough to still feel like it's doing something. And this is where part of what's annoying about even talking about AI is the fact that, like, it obviously does something. Like I told you, I was able to use it and have used it for other things in the past that have saved me genuine time and made my life easier. But those were the specific use cases relating to text, and I had an understanding of how they worked. And even then, in those cases, the AI was still wrong. Like, I still had to go through whatever it gave me and, like, make edits and corrections because it's not some magic thinking machine. And so when I see companies essentially sell it as that, or advocate for needing billions of dollars to train these models, even though, as we've seen in the past week now, a Chinese company was able to do it for millions, like, and not even hundreds of millions, like $6 million compared to the $500 billion we've just announced we're going to throw into the tech space, or the AI space specifically. Like, all of that to me calls into question what the fuck is happening. Like, what are we doing here? Why is this allowed to persist? And ultimately, I think the answer is because it's making the the right people money, and so they're incentivized to continue doing it. But as someone who went to tech for the sake of innovating and solving people's problems, I'm more interested in AI as a means of perhaps democratizing or universalizing something like, I don't know, healthcare, where feasibly, since we're talking about dealing with text data, if we had and could meaningfully, safely keep people's records, this could be used as a way for perhaps detecting things early, or like just reducing the cost of our already bloated medical system, right? But I know that's not going to be what it's used for, because that's not how our country works. And seeing this happen while people like Larry Ellison at this point just lie about that being the main intention or the main use case for AI, it's crazy making, and puts me in a spot where that naivete has shifted. And at this point, I feel like I'm just trying to tell anybody that will listen that AI is not AI. That the future that's been promised of some all-seeing and incredible intelligence is not actually what AI is. And that this is just something else that capitalism has seen and figured, wow, I can actually make some money on this, and is going to run wild with no regard really for the effects that it has on the population, the environment, society at large, because that's not the concern. Despite everything I believed about tech and the industry, here we are, the latest bubble that stands completely at odds with any of that and yet persists. It's demoralizing and disappointing, but hey, maybe we'll get more deep seeks and this bubble will burst soon. One can only hope. Thanks for watching.